The story begins with the fact that we are shown a burning village. There are also some wolf demons, of which there was a whole crowd. Immediately, they ran forward. They rushed straight at the girl in the center. This girl was very sad and she looked into the distance with empty eyes. She decided to act and used her powers, from which the wolves flew away. Immediately, the demon plopped down on the ground next to the guy, which surprised him. The girl decided to fly forward. She was already near the guy and he realized that she was immortal. She said that she would never have thought that such an ordinary village would ever be attacked by wolf demons. Look at the lifeless bodies of people. She added that she felt sorry for all these mortals. Then she looked down and was surprised. Immediately, the protagonist woke up and opened his eyes. He got up quickly and asked in shock if he was dead. Looking at the girl, he did not understand where he was. He saw a beautiful girl floating in front of him and recognized her. Her name is Han Yan. He immediately rushed to her and took her hands and asked Han Yan why she was here and if she had come to save him. The girl pulled away and asked how he knew her name and told him to let go of her hands because she didn't know him. The protagonist hugged her, which made her even more surprised. He said he knew she was angry, but he didn't want her to die because of him. Han had already started to get angry and the guy added that she should not worry. He would no longer act so recklessly. They would live a long and happy life together. She began to get even more angry and almost started to burn. And the protagonist asked why she was trembling. Han used her strength and pushed the guy away. While flying away, the protagonist asked her if she had decided to kill her own husband. Immediately, he slammed into the wall with all his might. The guy started running to the protagonist, whose name is Xiao Feng. He asked if he was okay. The guy asked Xiao Feng to answer him and apologized to the immortal as soon as possible. The protagonist was surprised by his words and did not understand where he was at all. That guy ran up to Han Yan and begged her forgiveness. He believed that Xiao Feng had lost his mind due to the destruction of their Xiao village. He begged her to forgive him. Closing his eyes, he was surprised that this was Xiao village, but remembered that his village had been destroyed many years ago. Now he definitely does not understand anything. He assumed that he had moved into the past. The protagonist was walking forward and behind him was Han Yan, who called her husband. Xiao Fei turned around and saw the beautiful Han Yan, who was embarrassed. She hugged him and asked him to promise her that he would return safely. Han started crying and the protagonist put his hand on her face and said he promised he wouldn't leave her. After that, we are shown how the wounded protagonist was sitting on the floor with a weapon and someone said that even he, such a powerful master, fell today and laughed. Xiao Fei said that he had never obeyed others and would not continue to do so. The protagonist smiled and wiped the blood from his face. He shouted that he would die with him and there was a strong explosion. After that, they show us the heavenly temple. Immediately, the protagonist woke up in bed and shouted Han Yan's name. He was in a certain room, so he was surprised. The protagonist looked at his hands and realized that it was not a dream, and he really did not die. Immediately, a certain girl appeared, who noted that he had finally woken up. The girl called him to follow her, because the head of their palace is waiting for him. The protagonist got out of bed and asked the lady what kind of place it was. The girl turned around and, leaving, said that this was the sect of the Starry Inquirer of the Sky. She asked him to go. The head has been waiting for him for a long time. The protagonist ran after her and agreed. Xiao Fei, looking around, saw only girls. He's doing exactly as he thought. He found himself in the past. Just at this time, Liu Hanyan had to save him from the wolf demons, although she later became his wife. At the moment, she does not know him. Immediately, the door slammed loudly and the protagonist was scared and did not understand what was happening and why they slammed the door. Someone asked the protagonist if his name was Xiao Fei and he was surprised. It was the head of the sect of the Starry Sky Inquirer, Liu Hanyan, who was sitting on her throne. Hanyan, she is the most popular immortal cultivator in the Society of Immortals. We are shown how a fat guy approached Han and said that he had come here to ask for her hand in marriage. It's hard to even imagine how many men around the world managed to fall in love with her at first sight. But before the fat man could finish, Hanyan just froze him, which made all the guys just shocked. But in all these past years, only a few have been honored to know at least her name. This fat man fell to the floor and started crying, and the other guy tried to help him somehow. Hanyan approached the protagonist and asked how he knew her name. The protagonist turned to her and replied that he knew it would be hard to believe. Most likely, she will even think that he is an ordinary madman. However, he must say that he came from the future, and in this future, they were married. The girl got a little angry and said she would give him another chance to tell her the truth. The protagonist fell to his knees and realized that she would kill him, definitely kill him. She had only used that tone before when she was very angry with him. He stood up and assured the girl that he was telling her the truth. He said that her favorite fruit was a banana. The girl was already very angry. Then he told her that she was most afraid of snakes, and when she was still mortal, she was bitten by a dog. She clutched the throne in anger and it began to crack. The protagonist added that she was also named Han Yan because of the prophecy of a fortune teller to whom her father went before her birth. The girl stood up and shouted at him to shut up, and Xiao Fei was surprised. Han cuffed his neck and lifted him up. She dragged him away and noted that he had studied her life so thoroughly, and believed that he was a secret agent of some sect. She looked at him with furious eyes and asked who sent him. The protagonist assured that what he said was true. She was born with a predisposition to frost. Therefore, she cultivates the technique of the icy heart, and not the technique of the 9 scrolls of the Starry Sky Inquirer. Han Yan was surprised by his words, because she understood that only her master knew about it. She didn't understand. How could he find out about it, and thought that her master had told her about it? She said she didn't think he could find out that much. Now she definitely has no choice but to kill him. It was a pity, because she thought she could get some information out of him first. The girl held out her fingers. The protagonist was very surprised and made a face. At one point, he managed to tell her that she had a red birthmark in the form of a drop on the base of her thigh. Immediately, Han stopped her fingers right next to the protagonist's face, and he was just scared looking at them. There was an awkward silence and the protagonist fell to the floor. The protagonist laughed and tried to clear his throat and said, "She doesn't think that such a thing can be known to an undercover agent." Xiao Fei came to his senses and opened his eyes. He saw Han Yan in front of him, who was very confused and asked what else he knew about her. The protagonist stood up and wiped himself, saying that he also knows that she has an ice lotus mark on her right breast. It appeared due to the cultivation of the icy heart technique. Her master made her start cultivating this technique. It is somewhat similar to making a pill. After all, as soon as she loses her virginity, all her power will go to her partner. Fortunately, she found out about her master's intentions, so she secretly killed him and made everything so that everyone would think it was an accident. No one ever found out about it. That's how she became the current head of the Starry Sky Inquirer sect. His wife, Liu Hanyan, did all this. She was just shocked by this information and her legs gave way and she fell to the floor. The girl was embarrassed and blushed while awkwardly silent. She put her hand on her chest and said that only she could tell about it. Otherwise, no one would ever have been able to find out about it. She added that he said he came from the future. Han asked in the future what happened to them. The protagonist understood everything and exhaled. He said that the future that awaits them is a time of great chaos, which has not been seen for more than 1,000 years. In 50 years, a ruthless war will break out between the forces of good and evil. The whole of Shenzhou will be engulfed in flames. 4 temples of the Starry Sky Inquirer sect were destroyed. The Red Sky sect rebelled against the demonic sect. Only a name remained of the Loshu sect, and 2 of the strongest masters of the Wuxian sect were killed. The sect of the Starry Sky Interrogator betrayed him and accused him of murdering his own master. He had to run away, but later he met her, and they subsequently became a Taoist couple. They decided not to go out and just live the life of a happy couple. However, this was not to be. They were attacked and Han shouted for Xiao Feng to run away. And there was a strong explosion. The protagonist put his hand on her hands and said that then he took with him the one who dared to disturb their peaceful life. He thought he would never see her again, and he can't believe that when he opened his eyes after that battle, he found himself in the moment when she saved him. He buried his face in her hands, which made the girl even more embarrassed and blushed. The protagonist was happy and he said he was so glad to meet her again. He considered that this was a real gift from heaven. From his words, the girl blushed deeply and did not know what to say. After that, the maids did not understand why the protagonist was still there. After all, the ceremony will begin soon. The girl can't even imagine what the mistress wants from him. Another replied that Han just wanted to ask him about something and assured her that she shouldn't worry about it. She knows how the mistress treats men. Besides, this guy is an ordinary mortal. At this time, the protagonist was writing something on paper and Han was next to him. She asked if this was the improved technique he was talking about. The protagonist agreed. This is an improved technique of the icy heart. It took them 3 years to perfect her technique. The girl bent down and realized that it was true. Such meridians can only be found in those who practice the icy heart. It's different for ordinary cultivators. The protagonist realized that she was really a genius, since she could understand everything just by looking at it. This technique was created especially for her. The girl blushed a little and got angry. And the protagonist added that this technique is not only more powerful, but also does not have the side effect that her master wanted to achieve. If he starts cultivating this technique, she won't lose her powers even if he marries her. The girl was even more confused and cried out asking what he was talking about, even if he really is from the future, who said that his, Liu Hanyan and she, are the same person. The girl smiled and turned around and added that it was possible that he did not come from the future, but from another world. Then it turns out that she is a completely different person. The protagonist looked at her and noted that she even thought about other worlds. And her knowledge and the truth are impressive. The protagonist put down the brush and noted that she was right. Perhaps she was not the girl he had once fallen in love with. The girl was immediately surprised and looked at the protagonist. Xiao Fei lay down on the bed and noted that he had perfected this technique only for his wife, so he could not allow it to fall into the hands of someone else, and Han was surprised by his words. The girl got angry and puffed out her cheeks. The protagonist asked what it was. Does she want to take away from him by force the proof of his love for his wife? She was angry and turned around and replied that she did not need a technique and she could handle it herself. The protagonist held out the canvas and smiled and said that he was just joking. There's nothing wrong with giving her this technique. The girl was surprised and turned around. Xiao said that he would give her this technique, and in return she would accept him as her true disciples. The girl shouted that it was impossible. There were only women in their yard of a floating snowflake and did not understand how she could accept it. The protagonist realized that she was refusing. He stretched out and said that he was fine. Then he stood up and added that then he would leave her, and the girl held on to her heart. Xiao said that from now on, nothing would connect them anymore, and the girl was simply shocked by his words. Then she bit her lips and asked him to stop. The protagonist stopped and looked back. Then he smiled, because he knew his plan would work. Han Yan agreed to take him on as an apprentice. However, he must not break the rules of their palace, otherwise she would not spare him. And another thing that made her blush a lot. Turning away, she added that he should not tell anyone that Xiao came from the future and that they were married there. The protagonist smiled and said that they had an agreement. The girl, a little embarrassed, asked what he was going to do. Xiao Fei took a brush and ran and said that he would immediately go write down his knowledge of the techniques. After that, they show us the mountains and beautiful temples. There were people standing on the bridge and they were surprised when they saw so many cultivators gathered there. Han Yan stood at the top and told everyone that they were now in the territory of the Starry Sky Inquirer sect. There were students standing below, and the head added that they had all been chosen as disciples of their sect. But before they join their ranks, they will have to pass a test of the spirit, so that they can determine the level of their spiritual root. Depending on the results, they will be assigned to the appropriate palace of their sect. Everything will depend only on their luck. Everyone was surprised and whispering. After that, I show us the protagonist's friend, who was looking for Xiao Feng and did not understand where he was. The protagonist himself immediately appeared, who put his hand on a friend's shoulder and asked if he was looking for someone. The guy got angry and asked where he had been. He hadn't seen him since the immortal had brought them here. The protagonist replied that he was just talking to her. She apologized and said she was sorry for what she had done. His friend whispered that he had asked around and understood something. Everyone here except the two of them are immortal disciples. They all already have a fairly high level of cultivation. If they had bad spiritual roots, he understood that they would simply be kicked out of here. The protagonist patted his friend on the shoulder and asked him not to be so afraid. Then he hugged him to himself and added that not only talent is important in cultivation, but also luck, so maybe they'll be lucky. The guy was delighted and noted that Xiao was right. He just continued to believe in the best. The protagonist smiled and said that he had every chance. After that, Xiao thought about it and remembered how his friend tested his strength. At that time, he could not have imagined that then he would be the most talented candidate for the apprentice. He was much more gifted than him. However, this time he had prepared for the test in advance. The protagonist grabbed his friend by the hand and dragged him along, saying that they needed to go and pass this test as soon as possible. After that, we are shown the Tajidian Hall of the Highest Principal, one of the 6 western palaces of the Forbidden City, which used to be the residences of imperial concubines. The palace is located to the west of the Eternal Longevity Palace, to the north of the Eternal Spring Palace, and to the south of the Mind Improvement Hall. A friend told the protagonist to take a look, because there are only cultivators around. Then they saw some special places where people were standing and asked who the chairs were prepared for. The protagonist said that, of course, these are places for the heads of the 9 palaces of the sect of the Starry Inquirer of the Sky, and he can see for himself. Immediately, all the students began to greet the senior masters. A friend told Feng to bow his head. You can't show disrespect like that. The protagonist understood him and did it. At the same time, he looked directly at Han Yan. Guangling Zhenren welcomed all of them to the sect of the Starry Sky Inquirer. He also introduced himself and said that he was the lord of the sect of the Star Inquirer of the Sky. All of them are some of the most talented people in their world. Naturally, they already meet the entrance requirements of the Starry Sky Inquirer sect. But before they can enter their sect, they need to pass the spirit test, so that each of their palaces can choose their own disciples. Nevertheless, they unanimously agreed with him. The protagonist hugged his friend and asked him not to be afraid, because everything will be fine. After that, it was announced that the test of the spirit was beginning. Everyone was just shocked and turned around, and there was a strong flash in front. This stone will be able to measure the level of the spiritual root of all people. After they pass the spirit test, they will be assigned one of the ranks, A, B, C, and D. Those who are called by the judge will have to go to the stone and put their hands on it. The first one was named Cheng Nu, and the fat guy said he was here. The judge told him to put his hands on the stone, and he ran past him and agreed. He raised his hands and pressed them against the stone. The judge said that he has the spiritual root of the tree, the average B rank, and it's cool. The next Zhangling Hang, and the guy raised his hand and said that he was also here. The protagonist was looking straight ahead, and Han Yan didn't know what kind of spiritual root this guy had. But if he has at least a B rank, then she will find a reason to take him in. Immediately, Guangling Zhenren turned to Han Yan. He asked her if she had already noticed any student. The girl was surprised and replied that not yet. The judge said that Zhang has a rank. Yi Zhengxi, the spiritual root of the tree, is a rank. The judge congratulated him, but he was surprised and did not believe it. The head of Guangling laughed and thought it was good. He did not expect that there would be such a gifted student among them. He then turned to Gong Han and said that he had heard that this disciple was one of the two she had recently brought to the sect. He was wondering what the second one would be like. The next one was announced, and it was Xiao Feng and Han Yan who became interested in him. The protagonist laughed and said that he did not think that he would ever have to go through this again. Sui Fei walked up to the stone and put his hand on it. After that, he was informed that he had a D rank, and the protagonist was not upset because he thought so. The judge was shocked when he saw that the protagonist had a D rank. He was just in shock and did not believe what he saw on the screen. The other guys started to get indignant because they were told that the best of the best were here. Where could such a weakling come from here? Another guy pointed out that a D rank cultivator is not too different from ordinary mortals. He had heard that such cultivators could become servants at most. The judge asked if he wanted to try again. He assumed that the measuring stone was wrong about something. The protagonist replied that he himself knows how untalented he is. The judge panicked a little and was surprised. Xiao approached a friend and called him a genius and asked how he felt, because he was cooler than him. The friend apologized to Xiao because he didn't know. Xiao came up to him and put his hand on his shoulder and asked him not to worry about it. He just had to appreciate his gift and work even harder. Besides, isn't he the kind of guy who needs some kind of talent? A friend noted that he was speaking correctly. The protagonist turned around and did not understand why it seemed to him that someone was glaring at him. Xiao laughed and realized that this made Han Yan very angry. The girl was surprised and did not understand how he could be so bad. The head of the Infinity Palace, Su Kaian, was angry and did not understand who he was. Who did he pay to be let in here? It's okay to take money, but you can't be so arrogant. Han Yan replied that she had brought this man and asked if he had any problems with it. Su Kaian was surprised and said that even she shouldn't have brought a person with such a low rank and asked if she hadn't checked him before bringing him here. The girl turned and squirmed and said that she had completely forgotten about it. He got even more angry because of her words and asked how one could forget such a thing and noted that she constantly forgets about some important things. The master of the Alchemy Palace, Bai Zhenren, laughed and noted that Brother Su looked so worried. The master of the Yin and Yang Palace, Gong Weidao, noted that it was he who needed to worry and not others. Each palace chooses its students according to the rating of the true Battle of the Heads, which took place several years ago, and the Infinity Palace then took the last place. In other words, if other palaces do not want to take the protagonist to themselves, then Master Su will have to do it, and we are shown how the protagonist approached everyone and got acquainted. He approached the girl and said that he was glad to meet her, because from now on they would become one family, and the girl was shocked. After the judge turned to the master and the master, he said that all 78 students had completed the spirit test. Guangling Zhenren said that according to the rating of the true Battle of the Heads, the Yin and Yang Palace would be the first to choose his disciples. He asked Master Gong Weidao to act. The elder turned to another old man, whose name is Ming Hai, to go, because he knows what choice to make, and he agreed. He immediately jumped hard and flew. Guangling Zhenren noted that now it was his turn and he trusted Chuan with the choice and he agreed. Then he said that the floating snowflake palace would make his choice next. The choice is hers, Gong Han. The girl told Mingxia that everything was as before and she understood her mistress. The protagonist turned back. He realized that Mingxia was coming and got ready. Mingxia was walking straight at him and the protagonist was standing in front of everyone. Immediately, she walked past him and he just closed his eyes. Mingxia told the girl that she would go with her and she was delighted. And the protagonist was surprised. He was confused and didn't know what to think. Then a guy was told to get out of the crowd and he ran forward joyfully. After that, Lu Ren was called to him and he agreed. Then the couple Jiang Wen and Dong Xin were called and they were delighted. As a result, it turned out that everyone had already chosen and there was only one protagonist left on the square. Xiao thought about it and realized that everything was exactly the same as in his previous life. He hoped she hadn't changed her mind and immediately thought that she wouldn't do that. Guangling Zhenren told Su that it was his turn, but there was only one student left, so he wouldn't have to choose. Su was angry and said that he did not want to take him in and felt that they had done it on purpose. Han Yan stood up and told Su that if he didn't need him, then she could take him in. Since she was the one who brought him here, then she should be responsible for him. She will fulfill her duty as the head of their sect's palace. Guangling Zhenren was surprised and asked if she wanted to accept this young man into her palace, but only girls study there. Han Yan replied that their sect is one of the pillars of the righteousness of this world. The sect of the Starry Sky Inquirer must promote its beliefs not only through martial arts, but also through the faith of people. There is nothing wrong with the fact that this disciple has a low rank of spiritual root. There are plenty of examples in the world when people with such spiritual roots achieved some success in martial arts. A boy or a girl, it doesn't matter. They are all just students to her, so she can take him to her palace. However, if they expel a disciple whom they brought into the sect themselves, then the trust of the sect of the Starry Sky Inquirer will be undermined. After that, they will no longer be able to be called a righteous sect. Gong Weidao thought this was a decent answer. That's what a true master of their sect should be like. Bai Zhenren said that unlike some, Gong Han showed real righteousness. Exactly, and this is despite the fact that for many years she accepted only girls. Decent, respect. Guangling added that, on the contrary, the Infinity Palace had fallen in his eyes. Now it is clear why they are getting weaker and weaker every year. These words made Su very angry. After a moment, he shouted loudly for everyone to stop talking, which even the audience was surprised by. He stood up and pointed his finger at the protagonist and said that he was also the master of the palace of the sect of the Starry Inquirer of the Sky and he did not need help in teaching his students. Even if this guy's spiritual root is not that good, he will take him in. He will accept and make him a worthy disciple of their sect. Guangling was surprised and did not understand what was going on here at all. Han Yan was surprised and asked Su to wait, because she was the one who brought Xiao Feng, so she must bear responsibility. Su replied that she had already recruited students to her soaring snowflake palace. The girl agreed, but wanted to add something. Su interrupted and said that although his Infinity Palace is the weakest palace of all, however, he is still the master of one of the palaces of the sect of the Starry Sky Inquirer. Even if there is only one candidate left among all the applicants, it is now his turn to choose students for the Infinity Palace. He shouted that Xiao Fei was a disciple of the Infinity Palace from now on. Bai Zhenren understood him and did not understand why he shouted like that. Guangling laughed and noted that today the heavens themselves had blessed their sect of the Starry Sky Inquirer and he was very happy. Han Yan did not expect this in any way. She didn't want the protagonist to blame her for this. She did everything she could. The protagonist was surprised and did not understand what the hell they were doing here. After that, they show us the Infinity Palace. Someone said that Junior Xiao. This is the main mountain peak of their Infinity Palace. The temple of their master is a little further away. It was Xiang Fian, the senior disciple of the Infinity Palace. He asked the protagonist not to worry. He would not allow anyone to mock him. Now he is part of their palace. He slapped him on the shoulder and the protagonist became very hurt and screamed. Fian was surprised and apologized to him. He had forgotten that his body was so fragile. He will have better control over his strength next time. He thought he had accidentally dislocated his shoulder. He wanted to put it back in place. The protagonist asked him to stop. He'd better hurry to the palace. He agreed. The protagonist laughed and noted that Sang remained the same as he remembers him. He always didn't understand how strong he was. In his previous life, he also got into the Infinity Palace. However, at that time he was just an errand boy. It took him 20 years to finally become a full-fledged disciple of the palace, although he is still not sure if he became a full-fledged student then or not. At that time, it was Brother Zhang who taught him martial arts, and, to be honest, he suffered a lot from it. This time, thanks to his wife's blessing, he was still able to become a full-fledged disciple of the Infinity Palace. It turned out very well. Su Mai-oking, Su Kaiane's daughter, appeared immediately. She was surprised and asked if he had really brought the youngest to them and asked when he would come. Su replied that he just got too excited and blurted out without thinking. Mai-oking boiled over a bit and said that he couldn't give it up. He took him in and shouted about it in front of such a crowd. She thinks that taking this student in was the right decision. Lin Xian, Su Kaiane's wife, asked, didn't Su himself say that despite his meager spiritual root, this one has a mature mind? She asked him not to worry, because she would help him with his training. Su noticed that his wife was right. Afterward, Mr. and Mrs. were told that Xiao Feng had arrived and Su allowed him to enter. Zhang asked Xiao to just do as he told him. The protagonist thanked Zhang. Immediately, the protagonist opened the door and found 3 dark figures in front of him. The protagonist crossed his arms and said that disciple Xiao Feng greets master, mistress, and elder sister. After that, We are told that the disciples in the sect of the Star Inquirer of Heaven are divided into servant disciples, second-generation disciples, and true disciples. Servant disciples are not allowed to receive the true knowledge of the sect and cultivate. They can only become official disciples of the sect after many years of hard work for the benefit of the palace. But the students of the second generation can already be called official students, although they do not have the opportunity to study the true or more complex secret techniques of the sect. They can cultivate quite well, which, in the end, will allow them to achieve good success. Only a few become true disciples. They study the best techniques of the sect, as they are trained from the very beginning to become the mainstay of this sect in the future. The protagonist was surprised and felt that he could not even imagine that because of her intervention, he would suddenly become a true disciple of the Infinity Palace. He even has his own yard now, and he doesn't even know what she was doing at that time. However, even with the experience of his past life, his development is still too slow. We need to come up with some other way. Immediately, someone started knocking on the protagonist's door. Xiao Feng was surprised and asked who it was who came to him at such an hour. He got up and went to the door and shouted that he was already coming. He opened the doors and saw a huge snow-white beast in front of him. The protagonist wasn't even scared and asked Su Kaini how he could be useful. The girl went downstairs and asked why he didn't react to it in any way. Others were scared to death at the sight of Sai. He smiled and replied that he understood her and asked her to wait a second while closing the door. A moment later, the protagonist opened the door and shouted that there was a huge lion standing near his house. Even the beast felt awkward. Xiao Feng asked if he reacted normally. The girl thought about it and replied that it would be fine. Immediately, she began to turn her head and shouted that no, and he should forget about it, because she was visiting him on another matter. Xiao was surprised and asked for what reason. After that, the protagonist and Su Kaini were sitting on the floor and Zhang Fian asked Kaini why she had brought Feng here. He doesn't think he will keep up with the pace of her learning. The girl asked him not to worry about it. It would be better if they study together, and she as his older sister will teach him everything he does not know yet. The protagonist agreed with her and assured her that everything would be fine. Su Kaini thought and laughed. She used to be the youngest among the true disciples, so the elders always forced her to study with them. However, from this day on, everything will change. Finally, there was someone who was not only younger, but also much weaker than her. She apologized, but she needed Xiao Feng to take the hit. After Zhang Fiani said that then today he would talk about the simplest things. Even if he is not gifted with talent, he must believe that hard work always compensates for mediocrity. The protagonist agreed with him. Zhang Fian added that in that case, he should start by saying that their cultivation is divided into 9 stages, namely, the stage of Kai cultivation, the stage of laying the foundations, the stage of core formation, the stage of the immortal infant, the stage of soul separation, the stage of fusion, the stage of separation of emptiness, the stage of Mahayana, and the stage of 9 disasters. The members of their sect cultivate based on the 9-scroll method of the Starry Sky Inquirer. Each of the scrolls of this method corresponds to a certain stage of cultivation. Su Kaini began to yawn and said that since she already knew everything, she could rest for a while. She decided to get some sleep. Anyway, the youngest is not very talented. He will have to spend a lot of time to understand all this. After a moment, Zhang Fan shouted for Su to wake up and she was surprised when she woke up. The man said it was time to check how hard she had been practicing with the sword yesterday. The girl was surprised and asked if she didn't need to fill in the gaps in their youngest's knowledge. She thinks that he has not yet fully understood everything that Zhang explained today. Zhang pointed his finger at the protagonist and said that Xiao Feng had already filled in all the blanks and even learned today's lesson. The girl was even more surprised and asked how long she had been sleeping. Zhang replied that it would not be long, only half an hour. Although the heavens have deprived Junior Feng of talent, he has an extremely high level of understanding. He grasped everything he told him on the fly. He did not expect that the protagonist would be able to understand and remember everything the first time. The girl asked how this was possible. She didn't understand why this guy was so good at studying. She thought he might have just pretended to be ordinary, but in fact turned out to be a real genius, or she was so bad. No, if everything continues like this, then he will soon join the other elders and start teaching her with them. She can't just lose the big sister status she's been waiting for. The protagonist approached Su Kaini and asked her if something was wrong, and she drooped a little. Immediately, she stood up and told them to go to the second brother. He would teach them the techniques of formations and talismans. He was very surprised and did not know what to answer. Immediately, the girl called Xiaobai and ran to him, and the protagonist ran after her and asked her to wait a second. Xiang felt that the younger one was a little offended by this. Well, it's not even bad for her, because she will be motivated to get stronger. After that, we are told that the so-called talismans and formations inherently have the same basis. They allow spiritual energy to act in a special way, which is why their results are much superior than the results of using spiritual energy directly. The master said that today they will study one of the most basic formations, Kaingua, which means the very sky. This formation reminds them, the Taoists, that the path of heaven is never interrupted. It goes on from day to day, from week to week, and so on, and they, the Taoists, have to imitate the heavenly way. Su Kaini was very bored and slapped herself in the face. Because she understood that she could not sleep, she had to maintain the status of an older sister. The master noticed that it seemed to him that Myoking was full of enthusiasm today. But Xiao Feng had some doubts in his eyes. The girl smiled and replied that it was quite natural, because no one can immediately realize such deep thoughts. Immediately, the protagonist stood up and the girl added that if he had any questions, he could contact her. Xiao Feng said that he really had doubts, and he would like to discuss them with the master. He was surprised and agreed. The protagonist noticed that he said that the Kaingua formation reminded them of the continuous and uninterrupted path of heaven. He agrees with this, but it seems to him that the Kaingua formation has another meaning. He asked if he did not think that such a continuous path could also indicate detachment from the rest of the world. Immediately, the old man shouted loudly at the whole temple. He walked up to the protagonist and patted him on the shoulder, laughed and said that he did not think that he, Xiao Feng, would turn out to be a real genius of formations at such a young age. He is absolutely right. The formation has another, more hidden meaning. However, he thought it would be too early to tell him about it. Then they went where and the old man told Myoking that from now on, if she had any questions about the formations, she could safely contact her older brother Feng, which she was just shocked and petrified on the spot. After leaving the temple, Su asked Xiao how he even understood what this old man was talking about. The protagonist replied that there was a moment in which he doubted, so he decided to ask the master. In fact, he understood that, after all, this was the second time he was going through this. Learning the basics is completely useless for him. If he continued to pretend to be an ordinary idiot, then his development would stop altogether, and he needs to become stronger as soon as possible. She didn't understand how he got around her at all. The younger one must have the knowledge of the younger one. She couldn't be the youngest for him, either. There was only one way left and she called him to go further. After that, they went to the library and Su said that they were going to the fourth elder sister, who is in charge of practical classes. The protagonist was surprised by her words and she added that it was not worth worrying about. The fourth sister is very gentle and reads books most of the time. She is a very kind woman. Su Myoking laughed, because she thought that now she would be able to regain her senior status. After all, this is not some kind of knowledge or enlightenment, but real cultivation. The fourth disciple of the Infinity Palace, Juyeoshin, apologized because she is busy. Su Myoking said that the only problem is that she is gradually losing touch with the outside world. The protagonist bowed to her and said that then they would not bother the fourth sister. The protagonist thought it wasn't even funny. Right now, he is an ordinary mortal who has not even managed to step into the stage of Kai cultivation yet, and she wanted him to fight the fourth elder sister, who is in the immortal infant stage. He would have definitely piled up. The protagonist started to leave and Su ran after him, saying where did he go? Immediately, she tripped over a standing foot, and thus fell on the protagonist, and he hit the closet with his back. Immediately everything collapsed and the cabinet broke and flew away. Lying on top of him, Su asked if he was okay and the protagonist replied that he was fine. Immediately, an ominous shadow appeared above them, which made them very scared. Juyeoshin got very angry and literally flared up. She asked them because they wanted practical classes. Su turned around and was very scared and replied that since she was already busy, they would not insist. The protagonist replied that they would probably already go and would not distract her. Immediately, the door slammed shut. The girl was just furious and said that everything was fine and there was no need to worry. After all, their older sister is not some kind of demon. After that, evening came and they show us the palace of the floating snowflake. Han Yan was taking a bath and was informed that she had a meeting with Master Bai Yun soon. The head told the girl to tell her that the meeting was cancelled and she still had things to do, and she agreed. The girl lay down in her water and wondered how the guy in the Infinity Palace was doing. After that, Lin Zian went to Myoking's room and asked her to take a break from her entertainment and try the soup that she had prepared for her. When she opened the door, she was very surprised. Myo was sitting on the floor reading books. She told her mother that she needed to study hard, which made Lin very surprised. After that, we are shown the night temple again, which is surrounded by a full moon. Su was surprised that their Myo was not doing anything, but studying right in the middle of the night. Lin added that she had been studying with Xiao Feng all day today and returned a completely different person. She had heard Xiang Tian say that the new student had a high level of understanding. It seems that he was able to learn the basics without any problems in the first lesson. Perhaps this is what put pressure on Manhwa King. The man noted that it was high time for her to take up her head. I've been idling and lazy for so many years. He never thought that this guy would be good for anything. Stu asked his wife if they had some extra spiritual herbs. Lin agreed, but did not understand what he was leading to. The man said that this guy just has a disgusting spiritual root. If they gave him a couple of these herbs, they might be able to keep Manhwa King motivated for a while. Lin smiled because she realized that he had a sharp tongue but such a soft heart. She agreed to arrange everything. At the same time, she will attach some kind of servant to him to help him with the housework. Sue waved his hand and said that she could do whatever she wanted. After that, they show us the swimming pool of Xiao Feng's courtyard, and the protagonist himself was there, and a certain girl went straight there. The protagonist held onto his shoulder and felt that his body was just heavy. He had the feeling that all the bones were crumbling now. Immediately, the girl knocked on the door. The protagonist quickly got up and opened the door and asked who she was. The girl replied that Mrs. Xian had sent her. She is here to serve him. He can call her Xiao Yu. The protagonist was surprised and asked what she was going to do here. Immediately he realized that in his previous life he definitely did not have such a thing and blushed deeply embarrassed. He said that he was planning to swim after all, and it was somehow wrong. Xiao approached him and asked if he really thought it was wrong, or should she still help him with bathing, and at this question, she narrowed her eyes. From her words, the protagonist blushed even more and did not know what to say. He felt that there was clearly something wrong here. He had the feeling that they wanted to eat him. He threw her hand away and said that there was no need to help him. He is a cultivator of immortality, not some helpless child. In addition, a girl should not help a young man with bathing. Xiao Feng assured her that he would do fine on his own, so she could go do some chores around the house, and started kicking her out, and she asked him to wait. He immediately closed the doors in front of her, and Yu noted that she did not think that he would be so clean. Therefore, she felt that she had come here for a reason and prepared special water for him and smiled. Then something happened and there was a flash. Immediately, the girl seemed to come to her senses and did not understand what had happened because she was heading to the young master's courtyard. The protagonist thought afterwards that he had definitely seen her look somewhere before. Immediately, he thought of Liu Hanyan and thought that it was her. He got into the water and was glad that he reacted in time. If I had hesitated even for a second, it would have been bad. He thought it was very dangerous to have a wife at the Mahayana stage, but he did not understand what she was doing here. Immediately, he felt that the water was very pleasant and did not understand why, and also that it literally oozed spiritual energy. He thought that Hanyan had prepared this bathroom for him and realized that she was still thinking about him and sat down and opposed to cultivate. After that, we are shown the Hanyan palace. Two servants were standing at the door. The first girl did not understand what happened and why the mistress was in such a bad mood. The other replied that she did not know, but added that the lady was already in such a state when she returned to the palace. In general, it's best not to bother her yet. Immediately, a certain sound thundered from inside, which surprised the girls. We are shown the floating snowflake palace itself, and Han used ice and froze part of everything. She did not understand why the protagonist could only reach the stage of Kai cultivation. She was very angry because she had spent the highest quality elixir on that bathroom. Another person would have already moved on to the stage of laying the foundations. She did not understand how much the heavens had deprived him of talent, and I didn't understand why she even spent such a valuable thing on him. He's not related to her in any way. He's a complete stranger. She felt that she probably didn't want to remain in debt to him for the improved cultivation technique. She just repaid him for it. After that, Sue was surprised that the protagonist had moved to the stage of Kai improvement overnight. He replied that it was so, and all thanks to the herbs of the lady. Sue thought about the fact that those herbs couldn't have such a stunning effect. Lin said that a breakthrough was good, of course, but he should not let self-confidence take over his mind, and he agreed. Xiang immediately appeared, who noted that Feng was not bad. He had heard that he had already managed to break through to the first stage of cultivation. The protagonist replied that he was just lucky, and Xiang was already standing next to him. Immediately, he grabbed the protagonist and noted that luck is also part of his strength. If you look at it that way, he's not so ordinary, and laughed. Feng also asked Xiang to be a little more gentle. He quickly let him go and apologized because he forgets to control his strength, and he laughed and noted that everything was fine. The protagonist thought, because in this life he began to worship by combining 3 teachings, in the end, he will become even stronger than in his previous life. However, because of this, his cultivation should have slowed down decently. But somehow he was able to reach the first stage in just one night and did not understand what his wife had given him yesterday. Or maybe he suddenly awakened a talent for cultivation. 2 years have passed since then. Manhwa King has broken through to the 7th stage of cultivation. Su noted that Mayo is very talented, even though they tried to suppress her cultivation so that she could strengthen her foundations properly. Mayo King was still able to break through to the void separation stage. The mother agreed with this, but the other guy is more worried. Su asked her not to mention him because he was getting angry. Immediately, Mayo came out and laughed and said that she had finally broken through to the next stage and asked where Brother Feng was. The protagonist bowed and congratulated his older sister on her successful breakthrough. Xiao Feng was at the 4th stage. Immediately, the girl was surprised and asked why he was still in the 4th stage of cultivation. The protagonist laughed and replied that he had no talent. Su got angry and shouted that he had spent 2 whole years on him. With so many treasures, even a pig would have already reached the 6th stage of cultivation. Lin tried to calm her husband down and asked him to be calmer. The man said that he would leave here, because he was afraid that he would soon lose his temper and hit him. The wife noted that then it is worth returning home together. Immediately they disappeared and the protagonist asked why the master and mistress had left. The girl was delighted and replied that no one knows what is going on in the head of this old man. He should forget about it and have fun instead. The protagonist was surprised by her words and replied that he would probably practice more. Immediately, the girl shackled him, which made him even more surprised. Immediately she flew and dragged him along. She replied that nothing would happen to him if she missed a day of training. It's developing too slowly anyway. Instead, she would show him a beautiful place. The protagonist has already started to almost spit from the pitching and replied that then he accepts her offer. He did not expect that the technique from his previous life would be so slow. What did his wife feed him then that he could break through in just one night? Immediately, the girl shouted that she was speeding up, and he was surprised. She flew very fast and he asked her to slow down. Mayo asked what he was afraid of, because she was with him. Immediately, she noticed something and decided to check it out. They quickly went down into the forest. The protagonist felt very bad because of the pitching, and Mayo was surprised. There was a huge dead beast right next to them. The protagonist sat down to examine the beast and told the girl to look at this bite mark. It was he who proved fatal. Mayo noted that it was a tamed beast of their Infinity Palace and did not understand who dared to attack it. The girl took out a blue ball and took it in her hand. Immediately, she shouted that they had to find him and summon Xiaobai from the ball. We are shown the pet Mayo himself, who is still small. The girl told Xiaobai that they needed to find the killers of this beast. The protagonist noted that this wind wolf can match the strength of a master of the 5th stage. They might have to face a beast much stronger than this wolf. Mayo asked him not to worry. This is the territory of the Infinity Palace. All the strong beasts have long been exterminated by her parents, and she can handle the rest herself. Immediately, Soyabai heard a sound and tensed up. He ran quickly and Mayo grabbed the protagonist by the hand and told him to run, because it seems that Xiaobai smelled something. Immediately, she saw that Xiaobai had returned to his original form and was greatly surprised. The girl ran up to him and asked the wolf lion what he had found. They found an interesting picture. Everywhere on the field there were many bodies of dead wolves. Mayo was shocked and didn't understand what the hell it was. At the same time, there was a snake's tail behind them, which was reaching for Mayo. The protagonist managed to turn around and shouted at her to be careful. The snake tried to hit the girl, but he managed to grab her and defend himself. It was pretty hard for them and the protagonist asked her if she was okay. The girl coughed and agreed. Immediately, the snake hit Xiaobai and he broke through all the trees that flew by. The girl was shocked when she saw this and shouted the dog's name. He was injured and fell to the ground. The girl took out the ball and told him to come back. Then they got up and the protagonist pointed up with the words that someone was on top. A snake was flying at them, which was preparing to unleash abilities on them. The girl thought that he was pushing himself and decided to answer. Mayo summoned the spiritual swords and they enveloped her. Immediately, the snake released its power and those raising their heads saw a huge green ball. There was a strong explosion. The protagonist felt that this was bad, because the snake emitted poisonous smoke. Mayo began to fall and noted that she felt sick somehow. The protagonist began to panic and asked her not to lose consciousness. The protagonist stood in the haze of the explosion with Mayo, and the snake was already preparing to attack. Xiao Feng shouted for her to deal with him. The girl got angry and replied that she was already afraid that he would not say it anymore. She quickly rushed at the snake and jumped up. After that, she fired a bunch of lightning bolts at her from all sides. From them, the snake twisted into a ball and Mayo chained it. Then the girl went down and jumped near the protagonist. Mayo thanked him for waking her up. Immediately, her legs began to wobble. The protagonist managed to catch her to support her and asked if she was okay. The girl agreed and explained that she just accidentally inhaled poisonous smoke. They need to get back to the palace as soon as possible and tell her parents what happened here. Immediately, a strong sound sounded, which even made the protagonist uncomfortable, and Mayo got ready. The snake began to destroy the electric shackles and there was only one left. Mayo was surprised because her parents had told her that the animals of this forest were not capable of resisting this technique. The protagonist was also surprised by her words. The snake broke free and he realized that this beast was at the stage of laying the foundations. Mayo stood in front of the protagonist and told him to step aside. Immediately, the snake tried to attack the girl, but she dodged, and at the same moment, she responded and hit his skin. She realized that it would not work. The skin of this beast is too strong. We need to come up with something else, and added that we need to aim at the eye. She quickly bounced off the ground. Then she jumped straight at the snake and ran while it was heading somewhere. After the snake rose and used some kind of force, from which the girl stopped. The girl was surprised when she realized that he had accelerated the spread of the poison in her body. Mayo created a kind of scarlet ball around herself, and the snake was preparing to hit her. He quickly kicked it and it flew away. She fell to the floor and was just shocked and unchanged. The snake opened its mouth and was preparing to completely eat Mayo. She realized that this would be her end. Right next to her, the snake stopped and was surprised as well as Milo. It was the protagonist who grabbed the snake by the tail and asked if he dared to ignore it. The girl was already very tired, and when she saw that Xiao Feng intervened, she began to cry. The protagonist was very tense and was preparing to lift the snake. He started to beat him up and then threw him out with the words to get out of here. And the snake flew dozens of meters away from them. Immediately, the protagonist approached the girl. He held out his hand to her and she told him that he needed to run. Xiao took her by the waist to lift her up, and holding her hands, he told her to send a signal for help. The girl fired a flash that went straight up. Mayo apologized, because she thought it was all because of her. Xiao asked her not to worry about anything, because he would take care of everything. Then he gently put the girl down and felt the shaking of the ground. The protagonist looked back warily. He smiled and realized that the next round was coming. The snake immediately wanted to hit him with its tail, and he prepared to attack in response. He hit her and said that then he would take this great chance to practice. He hit her and then took his hand away and started laughing. The snake did not receive any damage at all, and the protagonist realized that he had broken his arm with his blow. The difference in their levels is simply enormous. Even though he shook him a little, it's nothing to him. Then he exhaled and was surprised. The serpent got ready and wanted to put a certain sphere into it. The protagonist realized that he needed to act and ran straight at the snake. He quickly hit the snake, which caused it to spit blood. The protagonist exhaled quite a lot, because he still managed to. Immediately, the snake tried to attack the protagonist. He struck with his strength that the earth began to collapse. The protagonist was not under attack and the snake was surprised. It turned out that Xiao jumped on the snake, and the snake turned around and saw him. Immediately, the snake began to panic and tried to throw off the protagonist. He was spinning very fast and thus wanted to destroy him. It was very hard for the protagonist to resist and called him a bastard. He decided to use the force and told the snake to try it. Xiao immediately stuck his fingers into the snake, which caused it to scream violently. He quickly threw him down and the protagonist fell. But Xiao managed to regroup and he somersaulted a couple of times so as not to take a lot of damage. He hit a tree and noted that he had just left a serious wound on it. The snake rushed forward and the protagonist noted that this was not enough. Immediately, someone intervened and shouted for the damn beast to die. In an instant, the green aura cut the snake in two. It was Lin, Mayo King's mother, who flew at them and shouted their names. She noted that fortunately she managed to, but the protagonist had already begun to lose consciousness looking at Lin. At the same time, I show us the Hanyan Temple. There she cultivated and did her own business. She thought it was weird. She had reached the critical point of cultivating the ice heart technique and for some reason felt some excitement. After all, this is an improved version of the technique. There should be no hidden dangers. She checked everything herself. She thought that she should visit that guy. After all, she hadn't seen him in a couple of years. She wondered if he had made any progress. Leaving the temple, she said that it was just to sort things out. She doesn't owe him anything anymore. Immediately, she saw a flash that flew out of the temple. She saw a familiar character, the Taoist Guang Shendao, who was flying somewhere. Han asked Guang Shendao's brother to wait, and he turned around in surprise. The girl flew up to him and asked if he was heading to the Infinity Palace and thought that something had happened. Guang asked if she remembered how Master Kaini had accepted a new student a couple of years ago. A couple of minutes ago, he received a message saying that this student was seriously injured and is now in critical condition. Master Kaini asked him to help him. Immediately, Han quickly flew forward, which already broke through the sonic velocity several times. Guang was greatly surprised and only managed to pronounce the name Han Yatin. After that, Mayo is shown to us, who was also injured and lost consciousness. After that, a certain girl appeared who asked the second brother how Mayo King was doing. The guy replied that she had several fractures and was poisoned by snake venom. However, he had already dealt with the poison. He'll be back on his feet in a couple of days. The problem now is something else. Their brand new younger brother. Immediately, the door began to open. It was Xiang who entered Maio's room. The second brother greeted him and asked how things were going. The girl also asked if Xiao was all right. Xiang was angry and replied that the wound was too serious. Master and mistress, even by joining forces, can only keep him breathing. The girl asked Xiang not to worry, because their master had already turned to Master Guang Shendao. Xiang turned around and said that he would immediately go in search of medicinal herbs on the backside of the mountain. Immediately, a certain yellow card flew forward. She hit the door and closed it right in Xiang's face. The second one noted that the mountain was too huge and asked what he was going to find there alone. The girl noted that the second was right, and that Xiang needed to calm down. Xiang shouted how he could calm down and just do nothing. Immediately, the second one asked him to wait, because he realized that someone had arrived. 2 flashes of different colors appeared in this temple. Han Yan appeared first. Guan Shendao was behind her. He was breathing heavily and asked his sister to wait, because he couldn't keep up with her and was too tired. Immediately, all 3 of them came out and greeted them. Xiang was surprised when he saw Han Yan and asked what she was doing here. The head did not answer his question, but simply asked where Xiao Feng was now. Xiang was surprised and replied that he was now in the hall of the master and mistress. Immediately, the 2 simply disappeared. Xiang asked their master, and the master of the floating snowflake palace invited them, but the second brother did not know this. At this time, we are shown how Lin helped Xiao Feng. Su stood by and told his wife that it was his turn now and she should rest for a while. Lin asked her husband not to worry, she still had the strength. But Xiao Feng's breathing continues to weaken and asked when Master Guang Shendao would arrive. Immediately, they appeared behind them and said that they had already arrived. Su was glad that Guang had finally arrived, and when he saw Han Yan, he was surprised and asked what she was doing here. Han walked behind Guang, who was nervous for some reason. The girl said that it was better to focus on the treatment, but Guang and Su were surprised, and he noted that Han likes to command so much. Then he looked at the protagonist and was surprised. He was just shocked when he examined it. Han saw Guang's terrible reaction and asked what was wrong with Xiao. He turned around and decided to be honest. The protagonist has very serious wounds. All his meridians are damaged. It can be cured, but it takes a lot of money. He then looked at Xiao and asked if it was worth spending so many expensive resources on a student with such mediocre talent. Han started to panic and said that she would provide as many herbs as needed. Su intervened and said that he was his master, so he had to take care of him. He has plenty of such resources. The girl indignantly asked, since he understands that he is his master, then why would he let him get hurt like that? Su wanted to say something, but he didn't have time. Lin shouted for them to stop arguing. First of all, they need to take care of Xiao Feng. She asked Guan Shendao to do everything possible. He replied that since they were saying so, they had nothing to add. And then he said that he was starting to act now. After 3 hours had passed, a huge aura was flying out from the temple. Guan said that now his life is not in danger. Han agreed with him and noted that they were really lucky this time and thanked Guang Shendao. He laughed and replied that it was not worth the thanks. Immediately, realizing her words, he was outraged, because it had nothing to do with luck. They spent so many treasures, and even chose all the most expensive ones. Well, of course, they are the masters of their palaces. They can afford to throw away such elixirs. Then he said that he had a lot to do and would go. But in fact, he thought that they had spent so much money on an untalented student. The very thought that he will never have such riches makes his heart ache. He should get out of here as soon as possible. Han Yan said it was time for her to leave too. Su asked her to wait. He asked why she was helping Junior Feng so much. The girl turned around and replied that he had once done him a favor. Therefore, she decided to repay her debt to him. After that, I show us the battlefield where the corpses lay. The protagonist was walking forward right next to all this and didn't understand anything. He saw a lot of dead bodies and wondered only one question: where did he get to? Immediately he heard a cry for help and looking in that direction realized that the sound was from there. He saw a picture that Xiao Feng had killed someone. We are shown an already familiar guy who just said the name of the protagonist. The other Xiao Feng looked evil and laughed. Then he tore the sword from him and told him to die. The guy's lifeless body fell to the ground. The protagonist realized that this is him from a previous life, which means that this is all a dream. And now he looks like he's lost his mind. Immediately, someone from heaven told this brat to stop, which made the protagonist look up. It was the other masters who levitated in the air and said that he was completely distraught. He not only killed his brother, but also his master Su. He's a fratricide demon. The protagonist, touching his face, was surprised by their words. He assured that he had not killed anyone and this was a mistake. Someone asked how dare he deny everything. There is so much demonic energy in his body right now that no other evidence is even needed. They will kill him and clear Master Su's good name. The protagonist only repeated that he was innocent and clutched his head. It was as if the demonic side had won in him, and he grabbed his sword and said he would kill everyone. After that, he started laughing and replied that it was him and asked what was the point. He pointed his finger at them and added that no one would even know about it because he would kill them all too. The masters told them to execute him. They immediately put all their strength into it and a strong explosion occurred. The protagonist thought that in a previous life, when he was very vulnerable due to the impending transition to the next stage, a demonic spirit was able to enter his body and he was forced to coexist with it. After the explosion, the protagonist flew up and asked, "And this is all that the great sect of the Star Interrogator of the Sky is capable of?" and laughed. The protagonist began to fly away and the head said rather after him, "They can't hold back, they need to grab him, and it doesn't matter if he's alive or dead." Looking at this, the protagonist thought that by coincidence, he was able to invade his mind and drove him crazy in an instant. And later he killed his master with his own hands. Mo Chanking poisoned his mind for almost half of the time of his previous life. However, this time, he screamed that he would not be spared and woke up. Myo was standing next to his bed, who started crying and asked if he would never forgive her. She burst into tears and said it was all her fault. He can beat her up for it, she won't even resist. The protagonist asked her to calm down because it wasn't about her. "I just had a nightmare." The other girl was surprised and asked what the noise was. Immediately, she saw that Xiao Feng had woken up. She screamed from the bottom of her heart that Mr. Feng had woken up. The protagonist asked how long he had been asleep. Myo replied that he had been sleeping for 10 whole days. The protagonist was surprised by her words and looked at her in disbelief. Su and Lin immediately began to approach him, who noted that he had really woken up and asked how he was feeling. The protagonist saw them and started to get out of bed to greet them. The master said that there was no need to get up. They just came to check on him. Lin bent down to thank him for saving them from Myo King. If it wasn't for him, she would blame herself for the rest of her life. The protagonist smiled and replied that it was not worth thanking him. He had only fulfilled his duty as a disciple of their Infinity Palace. In his previous life, he was persecuted by the entire sect for killing his master, and he would never have believed that Ms. Lin would thank him for anything. Su asked his wife to take Myo King away from here, because he needed to talk to Xiao Feng. Myo didn't understand why. She also wanted to talk to him. She asked her father not to even think about scolding Xiao Feng. Lin explained to her daughter that her father just wanted to thank Xiao Feng. She knows that palace masters need to keep their face. They can wait outside. After that, the protagonist asked the master what he wanted to talk to him about. Su was wondering what his connection was with Master Guang Han. The protagonist was surprised and asked why he was asking. Su replied that as soon as Guang Han's sister became aware of his injuries, she immediately rushed here. She said that this was how she repaid the debt for his service, and he was wondering what she was talking about. The protagonist was surprised and asked if she had come here specifically for this. He immediately told the master that in fact this service was insignificant. Even he would never have thought that she still remembered it. As he said before, he and Master Guang Han met when his village was destroyed by demonic wolves, and she looked like an ordinary girl, and when she was attacked by one of the wolves, the protagonist rushed into battle and told her to be careful. He told her to run away from here as soon as possible, and he would detain them. Xiao told her to run again. If she didn't run away now, it would be too late. The girl noted that he helped her. She would repay him later. The protagonist, looking at her, was surprised and asked what she was talking about, and thought that she was crazy with fear. Xiao Feng could not have imagined that she was the great master of the sect of the Starry Inquirer of Heaven. Su realized that even though he was immortal then, he had the courage to rush to her aid. It was a decent thing to do. The protagonist laughed and thanked the master. Fortunately, in a previous life, that's how he met his future wife, which means it can't be called a lie. Su said that she had spent very expensive treasures on him this time, so she should be properly thanked the next time they met. The protagonist asked the master not to worry. He will remember what she did for him. He understood him and told him to rest and that he would not torment him anymore. The protagonist thanked the master. As he left, he thanked Myo King and said goodbye. The protagonist laughed and realized that after all, Su really does not know how to show his true feeling. Immediately, the protagonist somersaulted and sat down in a pose. He noted that thanks to the expensive gifts from Liu Hanyan, his cultivation would accelerate significantly. Help is good, but he should be able to protect himself. Looking at his hand, he noted that his cultivation level was at the 5th stage of Kai cultivation. It just so happens that the 5th stage of Kai cultivation is the threshold for the pen drop technique. Finally, he can go there. After that, it was the dead of night. The protagonist jumped into the Naruto through the trees and moved quickly. Then he ran to the cliff. He changed into ninja clothes and noted that it must be here. Then the protagonist caught his breath and immediately rushed down. He flew straight into the depths with a smile on his face. Then he saw a cave in a crevice with a tree and said he had found it. In flight, he used the pen drop technique. and landed very carefully on a tree branch. Looking into the cave, he was delighted, because everything was like last time. He easily entered the fire in his hand to illuminate the cave, and he went straight there, saying that if he hadn't reached the 5th stage of the Kai cultivation stage, he wouldn't have been able to get here. After passing on, he saw a skeleton that was wrapped in a kind of robe. Next to it was a magic sword and inscriptions on the ground. The protagonist knew that this was the legacy of a master at the Mahayana stage. He left it behind when he hid here from some enemies of the Starry Sky Inquirer sect. Whoever receives his legacy will undoubtedly gain great power. The protagonist asked that Mo Tianqing imagined everything like that. Immediately, he hurled his fire directly at this skeleton and a small explosion occurred. Mo Tianqing's bones began to burn. The protagonist created a new fire and asked why he was silent. Well, then nothing will stop him from staying here and burning his bones in the end. Immediately, someone asked him to wait. A ghost from the bones appeared and asked how he knew about this place. He believed that the protagonist was a disciple of the sect of the Starry Sky Inquirer. Then it turns out that they come from the same sect. Immediately, the protagonist threw fire at him, but he dodged and was surprised. Zio told Mo Tianqing to just look at himself. What a pitiful sight it is. Once, indeed, he was a master of the Mahayana stage, but now everything is different. He's just a pathetic spirit who's trying to beg for mercy. He asked why they didn't drop this useless chatter. He would just finally send him to heaven. The protagonist immediately threw 6 yellow cards at him. The ghost realized that these were talismans of soul destruction. They were created to fight spirits like him. Tianqi assumed that this was what he had come for from the very beginning. Immediately, the ghost began to evade all these talismans. One got right into Tianqi and he noted that there were no hard feelings between them and asked why he was doing this to him. The protagonist was surprised and asked again, and then answered, although he does not remember it, but once they were very familiar with each other. The protagonist threw 4 more talisman cards at him and the ghost realized that if everything continued like this, then his soul would simply be destroyed here and therefore he needed to escape. Immediately, Tianqi decided to act and approach the wall. With great force, he pushed off from the wall. He flew past all the talismans at high speed, spilled past the protagonist. Tianqi said that he would leave him for today. However, whoever he was, he would definitely find him and take revenge. Immediately, the ghost stopped because he saw the seal at the exit. He tried to fly through, but hit the seal. The protagonist smiled at this. He turned around and asked how he liked the formation of Isking's soul shackles. This time, he prepared himself properly. He proudly said that he would end Mo Tianqing today. In his previous life, it almost completely absorbed his consciousness. It was because of him that he suffered for so many years and fell into insanity from time to time. The ghost got angry and said that he was just a boy at the stage of Kai cultivation. Tianqi rushed at him and shouted that he would devour him, calling him a brat. The protagonist stood still and just smiled. The protagonist summoned a sword that cuts through many spirits, which was lying on the sideline. Immediately, the sword flew straight into the hands of the protagonist. The latter quickly grabbed him and cut the spirit into 2 parts. Tianqi was surprised and asked why he was able to use a sword that cuts spirits. Immediately, the protagonist used the shackles that appeared around the ghost. The ghost realized that he was shackled by the shackles of the Starry Sky Inquirer, which means the protagonist is from this sect. The protagonist told him that he had guessed right. The ghost began to be destroyed and shouted that even if his body and soul were destroyed, he will find it and take it with him. Immediately, the protagonist put a needle into the ghost. Tianqi realized that it was the needle of the Wandering Soul sect. The protagonist also decided to use a fairy. Seeing the seals above him, he began to say that the Sutra of the heart of the sect was Wuxian. Buddha's nature is completely pure. It exists from the very beginning, but it lives and does not die. She is unshakable and capable of creating everything. The ghost screamed for the protagonist to stop and listen to him. The protagonist was surprised and asked what he wanted to say. The ghost disappearing said that he is sure that the protagonist understands how many treasures the masters of the Mahayana stage can have. If he spares him and frees him, he will show him where his treasures are kept. The protagonist thought about it and replied that it sounded quite tempting. Tianqi smiled and added that if he spared his life, all his wealth would go to him. As his master said, the sea exists only because of the rivers that flow into it. In order to achieve high results, you need a lot of expensive treasures. He was thinking that he needed to buy some more time. He's going to be free of these damn shackles soon. The protagonist glared at him and replied that the ghost had made a mistake in something. He already knows where all his treasures are. He would go after them as soon as he was done with him. Immediately, he used destruction and an explosion occurred. The ghost's particles scattered all over the cave and the protagonist was surprised. He stretched out his hand and realized that something inside his body had begun to absorb Mo Tianqing's spiritual energy. A kind of transparent flower appeared on his hand. After that, he changed a little and turned blue. After a moment, it seemed to fly apart and there was a small flash. The protagonist did not understand what kind of lotus flower it was. In his previous life, when Mo Tianqing almost captured his consciousness, he was saved by this particular flower, but then it was just an unopened bud, not a whole flower. He thought that perhaps it was thanks to him that he was able to move into the past, but he'll figure it out later. And now to the main thing. He smiled and wanted to see what kind of gift the bastard had left him. He doesn't know what this book is made of, but his flame didn't damage it in any way. Taking it, he said that now all modern sects use jade tablets. Only some ancient sects kept paper writings. This treasure must be kept by him. Then, taking the robe itself, he noted that it was excellent. He thinks it's also some kind of treasure with protective properties. We can't have this lying here and just gathering dust. After that, he found a ring for storing items and it was all good for him, which made the protagonist smile a lot. Immediately, the sword caught fire and flew up. He flew right up to the protagonist, which surprised him. Zio noted that a sword that cuts through many spirits is not very pleasant to hold in your hands. It can be called the sword of misfortune because it was born of an endless number of murders. This blade hides incredible power. Naturally, many people wanted to possess it. However, as soon as it fell into someone's hands, the sword, which cut through many spirits, began to suck out the life energy of its owner. In the end, everyone turned into slaves of this blade. It was the same with Mo Tianqing, who once became the owner of this blade. The protagonist laughed and turned to the blade. He hoped that they would never see each other again. Zio immediately decided to act and pushed off the floor. At high speed, the protagonist began to run away, but the sword followed him and stood in front of him, and the protagonist was very surprised. The sword said that the protagonist smells delicious, and Zio was even more surprised. The sword that cuts through many spirits took human form in the form of a girl, and she said that the protagonist's soul smells very delicious and asked if she could take a bite. The protagonist thought about it with a smile on his face and replied that he was too weak to become her food right now. She asked if she could wait a little while until he got stronger and gained spiritual strength. She might even follow him. In fact, the protagonist panicked because he thought it was very dangerous. This blade can drain him in the blink of an eye. The girl was surprised by his words and asked if he wanted to say that he had become her master and why did he think that such a weakling could become her master. Doesn't he think that just eating it would be much easier? The protagonist replied that she was probably right. But he was more beautiful than that skeleton in the corner and it would obviously be more fun with him. The girl replied that it made sense. She started yawning and agreed to follow him, but first she wants to sleep. She added that they had agreed that when she woke up, he would let her, but before she could finish, she laughed angrily. The protagonist looked at the ring and noted that this time he also had to rely on this beauty, and in general, we can say that his outing was successful. There were already hundreds of high-quality spiritual stones inside this ring. Immediately, he remembered that he had forgotten about the time count and began to quickly escape from the cave. After that, we are shown the city of Bingyan Northern Empire. We are shown the auction. The next lot is a protective dragon talisman. This jade talisman was created by a Mahayana stage master for his younger students. It does not require spiritual powers to activate and can protect 3 times from the techniques of the master of the immortal infant stage. The starting price is 500 spiritual stones of the highest quality. All the men in the hall noted that it would be useful for the younger students at most and it was too expensive. This treasure is not suitable for masters, but as a gift to younger students. It's too expensive. They did not know any masters who would buy such a thing for their student. The auctioneer drooped and replied that these auctions already start with 500 spiritual stones. This is a very good offer. Immediately, someone offered 600 and the girl's eyes lit up. The master of the palace of the sect of the Starry Sky Inquirer offered 600 stones. There are no more bets. The treasure goes to Master Guang Han. Han smiled, because she thought that this thing would be useful for the protagonist. After that, Han Yan said that by the time she returned, that guy would probably already be preparing for the general guard training, so it will still be useful for him. Another girl asked who she thought this talisman was for and thought it was for her friend. The second girl was surprised and asked not to talk nonsense, because she thought it was for her. Immediately, someone watching the girls told the masters to wait. Han realized that this was the lord of this city and asked how she could help. Lin Tanru is the lord of Binyan City. He said that she had just left the auction and did not understand why she had to leave so hastily. There are many other treasures in their city. Han just walked past him and said she wasn't interested in other treasures. The lord of the city can return. The man was surprised by her pressure and asked her to wait again. He followed them and said that the jade talisman she had acquired was intended for one of their students. It just so happened that he had brought a bottle of jade dew with him so he could offer. Immediately, the girls took out their swords and put them to Lin Tianru's throat for getting too close. The girls asked him to stop because they don't want to do it. Then they left, and Lin noted that even her students were so valiant. Immediately, someone put his hand on Lin's shoulder and asked what he was staring at, because they had already left a long time ago. Lin saw the guy in front of him and asked what he was doing here and why he wasn't at the auction. The guy replied, "What should I do there? There are no more of these lovely fairies at the auction." Lin asked what he was hinting at. He just decided to see them off. His friend noted that they had known each other for years. He had noticed long ago that Lin was staring at Ms. Guang Han. Lin Tianru was surprised and replied that he just admired her. The guy noted that he had heard that she was not interested in men at all. Lin will have to try hard if he wants to win her favor. When he left, he said it was time to return to the auction. He shouldn't stay too long either. Lin thought about his words that Guan Han was not interested in men. After that, we are shown the Infinity Palace, the sect of the Starry Inquirer of the Sky. After that, we are shown how the girl greeted Master Zhang. He asked if his younger brother had come out yet. The girl replied in denial, and said that the protagonist has been in seclusion for a month. Zhang turned around and understood her. Then he decided to eat it another time. Immediately, large rays appeared from the building, from which he looked away. Zhang smiled and realized that the protagonist had finished after all. Zhang went to the door and the protagonist told him that he could enter. Zhang decided to act and entered. When he entered, he saw a certain energy. Zhang laughed and agreed to fight. Immediately, he recreated the blow of the Almighty and prepared to strike. He struck with great force and the auras collided. Zhang then noted that this protagonist is not bad. It seems to him that he was still able to break through to the 7th stage of the Kai cultivation stage. The protagonist came forward and noted that the elder brother was so strong that with one blow he dispelled all the aura of the sword that he had released. Zhang laughed and noted that the protagonist had also become much stronger. Now that he sees the result of his efforts, he is much less worried about the upcoming General Guard training. The protagonist was surprised by the words about the general training of the guards. Zhang said that this was one of the rules of their sect. All students who have reached the 7th stage of the Kai cultivation stage are sent to general training as guards. This is necessary in order for him to gain real experience. It's just that he stayed in seclusion until he broke through to the 7th step, so he didn't have time to talk to him. He held out his hand and said it was his license plate. It was delivered to him a month ago. He dropped it and added that the protagonist should remember that this training is full of surprises. He needs to always be on his guard. And if there are difficulties, he should definitely contact him using this sign. The protagonist looked at the number and thanked Zhang. Zhang then turned away and Zio asked if he wanted to tell him something. Zhang said that Mio King has been working on the foundation stage lately, and Master and Mistress want her to break through as soon as possible, so she probably won't have the opportunity to see him off. The protagonist should not be offended by her. Zio replied that Zhang should not worry, because he understands everything. Zhang clenched his fists and said, "I'm glad to hear that. Then he should return to his duties, and he will go." Immediately, Zhang flew out of the building and flew away like a flash. The protagonist turned away and said that Zhang had left and she could come out. Mio immediately appeared from the ceiling and noted that even her older brother could not find her and asked how he did it. The protagonist threw her an apple and asked in response if she really thought he hadn't noticed her. You quickly landed on the floor and grabbed the apple thrown at her. Mio bit it off and asked what he was talking about. The protagonist reached for another apple and answered her so that she would think for herself. He wouldn't have talked about it if he hadn't noticed her from the very beginning. The fact that he didn't tell her anything only means that she is here with the permission of the master and mistress. That is, the words that she would not be able to see him off were a lie and asked if she understood. Mio was surprised and noted that people are so complicated and asked why put some secret meaning into ordinary words. The protagonist was confused and in response asked if she really thinks that all the people around are as straightforward as she is. The girl said that she initially wanted to go with him to this guard training, but as it turned out, her parents were watching her too closely, so all she can do is stay here and keep training. She held out her hand and added that it was from his mother and father. Immediately, a flash appeared from it, and then a certain glow appeared in the air. Her father handed him a sword with the attribute of fire. It has amazing killing power and can be used as a magic weapon for flying. And this is from my mother, the Fire Raven formation. As long as there is spiritual power in it, even a master at the foundation stage will not break through it. His older brothers and sisters had prepared everything else for him. He'll see what's in there later. The protagonist took the bag and noted that it was all too expensive and asked if they had said anything else. The girl replied that firstly, her parents told him not to get into trouble and take care of himself. The protagonist laughed and asked what was the second thing. Mio said that secondly, if he does get into trouble, then in no case should he lose. He must be merciless to those who dared to attack him, beat them up so that they wouldn't even think about doing it again. The protagonist smiled and told her to tell the master and mistress that he would not let them down. Mio, leaving the house, said that she would go first and that they would see each other again. The protagonist reminded her not to forget to thank her parents for him. He originally planned to enter the floating snowflake palace to lead a carefree life, but now it seems to him that the Palace of Infinity, it's not such a bad place after all. I need to think about it again. He was wondering how Liu Hanyan was doing there. He hadn't seen her since she saved his life. After that, we are shown the Jingguang sect. Someone laughed and said that Lady Guanghan was truly worthy of the title of Grand Master of the Starry Sky Inquirer sect. He is delighted. Han replied that he overestimated her. She hopes that they will be able to settle all these issues together. The man replied with his consent and that they had agreed. He also asked if she would like to stay with them for a while. The girl replied in denial, because now they have a lot of important things to do. They will return to them a little later. The man bowed and replied that in that case it was time for them to say goodbye. Yihan and her bodyguards turned around and left. Immediately, the man told Mingguang to tell the others to close the gates of their sect. The guy was surprised and asked if he hadn't told the master of the Starry Sky Inquirer sect that he would help them. The man replied that whether they were devilish sects or righteous sects, they all want to drag them, the neutral sects, to their side. But he doesn't want to get involved in their dirty business, so Ming has to do as he says, and he bowed and agreed with the master. At the same time, Han and her girls left the building. The master turned to the bodyguard and asked how many more sects needed to be visited. The girl replied that they had 3 more sects to visit. Han Yan said she didn't think they would be able to really enlist their support. These were just ordinary promises. Well, she just wanted to get it over with. Immediately, someone showed up and said that they had met Han again. A certain guy changed into a women's suit and said that he had heard that they were not interested in men, so he changed his appearance a little and asked how she was. All 3 girls were very surprised and even a little shocked. Han told them to run and rush to escape. 2 guys were sitting at a table, and the first one said that he had heard that they had been doing well lately. Another replied that they, Squad A, had recently hunted the demonic time of the 9th stage of the Kai cultivation stage. They got a lot of points for it. Immediately, they noticed that Tang Pei from the B squad was coming. He didn't understand why he had such a sour expression. Did they give out some kind of bad assignment? He had heard that there were not enough people in his squad, as one of the true disciples had still not shown up. That's why he walks around angry. They did not envy this true disciple, who would be the target of Tai Pei's wrath. Tai went to the door of the B squad. After thinking about it, he decided to act and opened it. When he entered the room, he saw a table where 3 people were sitting. The guy at the table asked what task their squad had been given this time. Tai replied that they had been assigned to guard the Tian River. The disciple of the sect of the Starry Sky Inquirer, Lin Smi, was surprised at his words. She thought that the local animals had become much more aggressive than usual lately. A disciple of the sect of the Starry Sky Inquirer, Zhu Ming, thought that everything was clear. At this time, their sect is collecting blue-eyed fish to make elixirs, and the animals feel this and become more vigilant and aggressive. Lai Fang got angry and slammed his fist on the table, saying that this coward never showed up. How can they patrol at Tian when there are only 5 of them? Immediately, someone appeared who apologized for being late. It was the protagonist who asked if this was Squad I. He introduced himself to them and told them that he had come here to join them during the General Guard training. Tai turned around and asked if it was Xiao Feng and added that he was a whole month late. He demands an explanation. The protagonist replied that he was busy with his cultivation, as he felt that he would soon break through to the 7th stage of the Kai cultivation stage. Therefore, he had to go into seclusion and skip a month of guard training. Lai Fan smiled maliciously and asked about the 7th stage of Kai cultivation. He went into seclusion for a whole month to break through to the 7th stage of Kai cultivation. So, he hasn't even moved on to the stage of laying the foundations yet. He also has the courage to come here a month later and use such a pathetic excuse. He takes them for fools. Although this was to be expected from a disciple of the Infinity Palace. Immediately, the protagonist got angry and wanted to hit Lai Fan. He hit him, but Lai Fan managed to block him. But Lai Fan still flew far away against the wall. After a moment, the protagonist rushed forward and flew at him. Lai Fan was scared and asked what he was doing. Lin Mai and Zhu Ming were as surprised as possible. Immediately, the protagonist's fist stopped near Lai Fan's face. It turned out that Tai stopped the protagonist's punch and asked if he really didn't care about the rules that forbid harming his comrades. Xiao Feng was angry and asked in response what rules he was talking about, because he had just insulted his master and their entire palace, and added whether Tai was deaf. Lai Fan asked them to calm down, because they are all in the same boat, so they should not quarrel with each other. The protagonist pushed Tai's hand away and said she was right. He explained to Lai Fan that he didn't have a very good tongue, so he shouldn't hold a grudge against him if he accidentally insulted him, and Lai Fan noted that he would remember it. Tai said afterwards that there were now 6 of them with Xiao Feng. Since the Tian River has 4 tributaries, they will have to split into 4 groups. Lin Mai and Zhu Ming, they will be in the same group. Lai Fan will be in a group with Lin Sixi. Tai added that he thinks Xiao Feng is strong enough to patrol alone. He will be the third and fourth group and asked if he would mind. The protagonist replied that he didn't care. Immediately, Lin Sissy said she objected. She didn't want to be in a group with Brother Zio. Lai Fan asked the girl not to think that he was some kind of weakling. It's just that he was attacked too suddenly, and he didn't have time to use the techniques. She knew that even though Lai wasn't that handsome and wasn't strong in close combat, he could put up a decent fight if he prepared well. Lai Fan was simply shocked by her words. Tai noted that if that's what she wants, then so be it. She would be in the same group with Xiao Feng, and Lai felt sad about it. If there are no more objections, then they proceed and everyone agreed and went to the exit. After that, they show us the beautiful blue water. The two of them were flying on a sword and the protagonist asked Sissa why she wanted to team up with him. The girl replied that Li was too ugly, and she wanted to find herself some handsome guy. The protagonist looked at her with a smile and laughed, because her words are like honey to his ears. Sissy then added that she had heard that he, the Zio brothers, was the most incompetent of all the true disciples of the last decades. Then she asked if he would be offended that she had said that. The protagonist was upset and noted that it was amazing that such a person was hiding inside this cute girl. It's hard to believe that she was able to live up to her age. Lin Sissy, the owner of the B-rank spiritual water route, is a true disciple of the Wind Palace. Her older brothers and sister quickly fell in love with her for her sweet appearance and gentle nature. At least they liked her until she opened her mouth. Sis greeted the master and the elder brother, who had just appeared. She asked him if his older sister rejected him again. This is the 15th time, and does she really dislike him so much? The older one got hit right in the heart and asked the younger one to stop. Then Sissy turned to the master and noted that he was getting less and less hair and asked if it was because he was old. And the master was angry and shocked. After Sissa told the protagonist that when the general training of the guards began, the master and the older brothers sent her here in a hurry and with great joy. She laughed and added that they didn't hesitate for a second. The protagonist turned around and noted that this was really too much. She had only told them the truth. They had been too cruel to her. Sis noted that this was true. And the master also said that she needed to learn to be a little more restrained during battles with demonic beasts. At least she doesn't think she has a problem with it. The protagonist was surprised by the words more restrained and asked what she meant. At the same time, something was watching the protagonist and Sis. Immediately, the protagonist looked ahead and was surprised. He saw a frog in front of him and Zio noted that it was just a low-ranking beast. Then he looked back and saw that Sis was trembling and asked what was wrong with her. The girl screamed violently that there was a demonic beast, that the water had already begun to fly away from them. Her scream was so loud that the protagonist had to cover his ears. She quickly began throwing water in all directions and shouted for this beast to die. The protagonist evaded her technique and asked her to calm down, because she would also ruin him. The girl got angry and said that all the demonic beasts should die. She launched a large wave of water at the monster. A moment later, the toads died and flew away. Then she finished and decided to catch her breath. After she came to her senses, she began to quickly turn her head, because she was at a loss where the protagonist had gone. Immediately, he landed behind her and noted that he was here. The girl ran up to him and grabbed his hand and began to cry, saying that this demonic beast had scared her so much. They are very scary in her opinion. The protagonist was a little angry and asked if she was sure it was fear. Zio thought that the girl, even though she was scared, was able to use a rather powerful technique with such ease. Sis continued to cry and complain about the monsters while hugging the protagonist. The same one kept thinking that using such a technique against one low-ranked beast was a waste of strength. The protagonist moved away from her a little and said that she should stop shaking. He had already been to these places. He does not think that they will meet demonic beasts again along the way. Sissy asked if it was true. A moment later, the turtle beast came out. There were a huge number of them and they surrounded the protagonist and the Sis. Zio noted that they seemed to have entered the lair of demonic beasts. Immediately, she started using techniques and shouted for them to die. After they were attacked by demonic worms and the protagonist noted that he was wrong again. But the girl was no longer afraid, but simply killed them with rage. After that, the protagonist saw a cut snake and took something out of its body. He said she handled everything pretty quickly. At this rate, they will soon be done with patrolling them. That's how to use the power of your younger ones. Sis turned to the protagonist, because he said that they would soon reach a safe place and she did not understand when. The protagonist put his hand on her head and asked her not to worry, because everything will end soon, and she has to be patient a little more. Then he looked back and saw a shadow under the water and thought that there were still demonic beasts under the water. After that, he saw shadows under the water from all sides, which were heading straight towards Zio and Sisu. Immediately, the protagonist grabbed the girl by the arm and shouted for her to run. At that time, something big appeared from under the water. Zio and Sis were surprised and the girl asked what it was. It was a demonic beast at the stage of laying the foundations, the Tanlo crocodile. The protagonist got angry when he saw the beast at the stage of laying the foundations. The girl was scared and asked how the demonic beast turned out to be here at the stage of laying the foundations. She did not understand what to do with them. The protagonist replied that they needed to run. They shouldn't get into a fight with this big guy. It's better to call for reinforcements. The pair quickly began to fly away, but the beast did not want to let them go and decided to use some kind of technique. Immediately, water whirlpools rose, and the beast sent a red ray into them. The protagonist pushed the girl away and told her to take care and got into a whirlpool. The girl was in shock, and Zio asked her not to stop and just run. The protagonist was able to dodge the beam of the beast at the last moment. Then he called for burning cards and a strong explosion occurred. The protagonist stood on his sword and flew to thank his elders for their wonderful gifts. But he had to spend a bunch of talismans to create water whirlwinds and save himself and Sissa. At the same time, the beast was still trying to hit the protagonist, and Sissy got into a whirlpool and screamed. Zio took out another talisman and realized that the crocodile was arrogant. He told the map to fly and dropped it. After that, he quickly flew up to the girl, and the beast tried to suck her in. Sis was surprised when she saw the protagonist who swam up to her. A moment later, the crocodile swallowed the two of them, and then he began to dive under the water. The girl began to wake up and did not understand what had happened to her. She sat up and called Zio Feng. The protagonist appeared next to her and asked if she had woken up. The protagonist created a shield and noted that as she sees. They landed in the stomach of that big guy, and now he is diligently trying to digest them with his acid. Sissy was surprised and asked what they should do. The protagonist thought for a while, and then laughed and replied that first of all she would have to change her clothes. The girl was scared and covered her body. She replied that she had not brought a change of clothes with her. The protagonist gave her his cloak and told her she could wear it until they got out of here. Sissy asked how it would help them get out of here. Zio Feng replied that he had already called for reinforcements for them, and this formation would protect them from stomach acid. All they can do is wait for a convenient opportunity. Immediately, the girl paid attention to the shield and asked what kind of formation it was, because it was very powerful. The protagonist replied that this formation was given to him by his master as a true disciple. He asked if her master hadn't given her something that could have saved her life in an emergency. The girl didn't know what to say. The protagonist apologized and noted that he shouldn't have asked such a thing. After that, we are shown two flashes that flew at great speed. They were Zhu Ming and Lin Mai. The girl noted that it was from here that the mascot was released. Zhu added that he feels strong fluctuations of spiritual energy here. They must have been fighting some kind of demonic beast. The blonde man noted that they should be careful not to scare off the monster. Lin Mai, at the same time, began to create a huge fireball, which scared Zhu. He asked her to hold her horses. Immediately, she fired this fire directly into the water. This ability hit right on the huge crocodile. The girl was scared and asked her brother why everything was shaking so much. The protagonist asked her not to panic. He thought that apparently someone had come to their aid, so the crocodile started up. The girl asked again and was delighted to think that these were their brothers and sister. The protagonist thought that this might be the case, but it seems to him that something is wrong here. They were shaking too much. Zio told the girl to sit closer to him, because they made this guy very angry, and the girl agreed and hugged him. Zhu Ming asked the girl what she was doing, because he asked her to be quiet. Lin Mai asked what he was worried about. There are two of them. Nothing serious will happen. Immediately, the crocodile got out of the water and Zhu Ming realized that it was a demonic beast at the stage of laying the foundations, and the girl realized that it would not be easy. She managed to shout at him to be careful, because the crocodile is attacking. Immediately, his stomach started to hurt a lot. The crocodile rolled over and fell on its back. Zio started shouting to see if there was anyone outside. Lin Mai realized that it was Brother Zio's voice. Zhu Ming asked if this beast had swallowed them up. The protagonist agreed. He and the younger Lin are now in the stomach of this crocodile, but its skin turned out to be too strong, and they cannot get out. They need their help. The crocodile stood up and Zio shouted that he would help them by interrupting his attacks from the inside. Lin Mai understood him and shouted at Zhu Ming. He understood her without words and also began to use his technique. At this time, the beast opened its mouth and began to create something. Immediately, the protagonist hit the beast from the inside, which shocked the crocodile. Lin and Zhu realized that they needed to act now and put their techniques into it. Zhu then asked if they had won. The girl replied in denial, because the crocodile is attacking again. The beast tried to hit them with its tail, but two swords stopped its attack. It was Taipei and Lai Fan, and Zhu and Lin were delighted when they saw them. Tai asked how they managed to stumble upon such a huge demonic beast. Zhu replied that they had only come to Zio and Lin's aid. They were swallowed by this beast, but they are still holding on. They need to hurry up. Lai Fan started to get angry and thought it was ridiculous, because it was just a beast of the foundation stage. He felt that this Zio Feng was so weak that he couldn't even protect the girl from such a thing. Tai told them to get ready to create a formation. Lai Fan was surprised and asked the captain if he believed them. Tai replied that they could still try to save them and he should not forget that there was a younger sis inside this monster now. Lai Fan was angry and pointed out that it was all that damn Xiao Feng's fault. Immediately, Tai ordered everyone to create a formation and a large seal appeared in the sky. The first one was Lin Mu, she used Shayan. The second was Zhu Ming Shaiyang. The third is Lai Fan Tayan. Tai turned to the protagonist and said that if he had any idea how to get out of there, then he should use it right now. The protagonist realized that they were using the 4-elephant formation, which was not bad at all. Xiao Feng said that he needed Sis to help him a little. The girl was surprised and asked what she needed to do. Xiao smiled and asked her not to worry, because that's exactly what he needed. All 4 of them used the deadly 4-elephant formation around the crocodile. The protagonist noted that the spiritual forces of fire and water do not mix, but if they still try to mix them, then a boom will occur. Immediately, the crocodile began to explode from the inside. After that, the crocodile stopped and seemed to calm down. Saw bubbles and the movement of water behind him and realized that they were there. Immediately, the protagonist, holding Sis in his arms, jumped out of the water. Lai Fan wondered why the protagonist's clothes were on and how dare he hug her like that. When the protagonist flew up to them, Sis started screaming for Xiao to let her go faster, and Fan was angry. The protagonist noted that this was not what they thought, and Lai Fan became even more angry. The girl explained that her clothes had been destroyed by a demonic beast, so Xiao lent her his. Lin immediately flew up to him and noted that Xiao was not bad. She could help him with his training after they get back. The protagonist thanked her for the offer, but replied that it was not necessary. For now, he wants to focus on his cultivation. Lin was surprised. She did not expect that he would prefer a girl with fish brains, and Sis was a little angry. Lai Fan, still angry, pointed out that it was just a demonic beast of the foundation stage. He decided to fly up to the crocodile and added that if he had come earlier, he would have dealt with him in a moment. Lai Fan kicked him and said it was all his fault. Immediately, the crocodile opened its eyes, which glowed with a red glow. Zhu immediately shouted to Fan to be careful, because he realized that the demonic beast was still alive. He immediately began to inflate and prepare to explode. Tai thought that was a problem, because he was going to explode. They rather need to create a defensive formation. Lin said they were too close to him. Even a defensive formation won't be able to protect them. Immediately, the protagonist decided to act and he flew past Lin. Xiao Feng flew ahead of everyone, and they were surprised. He immediately summoned a fire talisman and took it in his hand. Flying up to the crocodile, he threw the talisman right into its eye. Immediately there was a strong explosion and it just flew apart. Sissy noted that it wasn't that scary. Zhu asked, "Is this the power of the beast of the foundation stage?" Tai replied in denial, and explained that it was all due to Xiao Feng blowing up the talisman given to him by the sect. The demonic beast did not have time to accumulate the energy for a real explosion. He made a decision so quickly. Such determination even scares him. Lai Feng got even more angry and called the protagonist names. He pointed at him and shouted that he had willfully destroyed his master's ritual talisman and disobeyed orders. He will tell the elders about everything. Lin turned around and noted that Feng had no shame or conscience. The protagonist turned around and replied that he should do as he knows. Lai Feng got even angrier and wanted to say something again, but Tai told Tom to stop. In any case, the appearance of a demonic beast of the foundation stage on the Tian River is something out of the ordinary. They need to report this to the sect, and everyone agreed. Immediately, the protagonist began to spit blood. Sis flew up to him and grabbed his hand and asked if he was okay. The protagonist replied that everything was fine. "I just suffered a little from the explosion." Lai Fan laughed and noted that Xiao is not as strong as he wants to appear. He deserved it and called him a pretender. The protagonist decided to continue on his way and called his sister, because otherwise they would fall behind. After that, we are shown that the protagonist still hasn't stopped bleeding. After that, the guards show us the hall. All 4 of them were standing near the door, and Sis asked why Tai and Xiao Feng hadn't come out yet. She asked Lin if the elder really wanted to punish Brother Xiao. They could explain everything to them and help him. Lin asked her not to worry, because the elder is not so stupid, he will figure everything out. Lai Fan said with anger in his eyes that the protagonist had destroyed the guard badge that the sect had given him, disobeyed orders and put everyone in danger. Yes, he is a real violator. The elder would never let him go just like that. Lin asked Fan if it was his father who taught him to be so petty, and Fan, in turn, got angry and wanted to answer her something. Immediately, Zhang noticed that they were coming out. The door opened and Xiao and Tai appeared. Zhang asked how it went. Lin asked if the elders had punished Junior Xiao. Tai replied that it was quite the opposite. The elder praised Xiao for a long time, and in the end called him worthy of the title of a true disciple. The protagonist laughed and replied that it was because the elder was very wise and understood what was what. Well, and, of course, he does not listen to the opinions of such as some. His words made Fan even more angry. Lin noted that this was good. She asked if he could have a drink with them, and they'll take Sister Lin with them, and Sis blushed a little. The protagonist turned around and, standing on his sword, thanked her for the invitation. But he decided to have a drink sometime next time. He has a couple of urgent things to do and apologized to Lin. He immediately flew away from the temple at high speed. Lin was upset and asked if she thought he was too callous because he didn't show any interest in them at all. Sissy, a little embarrassed, replied that maybe he already has someone. After that, the protagonist flew somewhere into a closed cave. The protagonist clutched his heart and started spitting blood and told Jan Zion that if she started rampaging now and killed someone, he would never get away with it. The spirit replied that she was just hungry. Besides, that rat-like guy was looking at him very unkindly. He could have been eaten. She didn't think that he would choose to feed her with his blood instead of just letting her kill him. He's really too kind to others. The protagonist replied that she should forget about the teachings of the demonic sects. They don't kill their own people in broad daylight. She flew up to him and stood behind him and said that they were followers of righteous sects, all hypocrites. Jan Zion is not ready to put up with this. She couldn't hold back her bloodlust and just tasted him a little, and he was already writhing in pain. She blushed and asked if maybe she should just drink all his blood. Then he would no longer feel pain and asked how he liked the idea. The protagonist replied that drinking all his blood was like killing a chicken that laid eggs for her. He added that he had a better idea and asked if she would listen. Jan Zion agreed to listen, but said in advance that she was not going to leave his body. The protagonist asked why they couldn't make a deal with her. The girl told him not to dream. Zio laughed and said that he wanted to say that after signing the contract, he would recognize her as his mistress and put his body at her disposal. Well, if she's not interested, then fine. The girl told him to stop and asked who said she wasn't interested. The protagonist was surprised and asked if she agreed. Jan Zion noted that she thought he was up to something. The protagonist asked what he could do at all. He is just a junior disciple of the Kai cultivation stage who almost died at the hands of a demonic beast of the foundation stage. He needs her strength to survive. It seemed to him that if he accepted her, she would save him in case of danger, and in return he would devote himself entirely to her service and become her diligent vessel. The girl laughed and noted that since he was already saying that, there was nothing to be done about it, and therefore she agreed. She decided to sign the contract as soon as possible and winked at him. Immediately, some seals appeared around her hand. They flew out of it and taking off. The girl said that these were the runes of the conclusion of the contract. The protagonist must draw them with his blood and mentally pronounce his name. After the conclusion of the contract, he must unconditionally obey her. If he disobeys, these runes will consume his soul, and his life will turn into utter hell. He'd better give up all sorts of schemes against her right away, since they won't work on her. The protagonist bit his finger and asked her not to worry, because he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. The protagonist reached for the sword and told her to act. Then he touched the sword and began to draw something with his blood on it. He thought it was a great deal, and Jan Zion was a little surprised. She was already drooling and she didn't understand what was wrong with this guy, but he just had a lot of spiritual energy. She didn't know what kind of technique he was cultivating, but his spiritual power didn't seem to be demonic or the power of a righteous sect master. His spiritual power is so pure and smells delicious. Jan Zion took hold of her face and blushed, adding that from that moment on, all his spiritual energy and himself belonged to her. Immediately, the protagonist took the sword and told it to thicken. The girl was surprised and told him to stop. She did not understand what he had drawn there and what kind of runes these were. The protagonist smiled and asked if she recognized her own runes, because she had shown them to him once. Jan Zion told him to stop and let a certain aura into him. The protagonist easily blocked her attack. Zio Feng explained that the sword is currently in the process of recognizing a new owner, so he created a barrier protecting it from external interference. This is the will of the sword itself. She, being the spirit of this sword, must submit to his will. The girl, looking at the protective barrier and these runes, realized that this was really a ritual for recognizing a new owner, but she did not understand how. She would never let anyone know about her own runes of submission. Then the sword began to resist. The protagonist was surprised and asked what was going on. Jan Zion laughed and noted that with his supply of blood and spiritual energy, he would never be able to saturate the sword that cuts through many spirits, and therefore she advised him to just give up. The protagonist heard her and smiled. He pricked his finger and said that all he needed to do was add some blood. He grabbed the sword with both hands and began to saturate the sword. Jan Zion told him to stop, because he would draw out all his essence and blood from him, and asked if he really decided to die. The protagonist replied that if he could not overcome even such an obstacle, then how could he fix everything that he still regrets? Immediately, his face changed and his eyes turned red. A huge oppressive aura flew out of his body. After that, the protagonist fell to his knees, and losing consciousness, he noted that he had succeeded. A moment later, he fell to the ground, and Jan Zion began to fly up to him. She noted that no one could ever force her to reveal the secret of her own runes. She could only do it of her own free will. However, she didn't understand why she didn't remember it. She stretched out her fingers to his head and thought that the protagonist had no idea what he would do, even though he's unconscious right now. But she doesn't have a chance to get rid of the binding runes. She called him a dumbass and didn't understand what had happened between them in the past. After that, we are shown the protagonist's past life, and there he sat on his throne, and Jan Zion was next to him. The girl noted to him that it seemed to her that he might not survive this battle, and she asked if he had any last wish that she could fulfill. The protagonist replied to Jan Zion that they had been fighting together for many years, but she had been faithful to her pride all this time and did not recognize him as her master. He asked how about he become her true master if he still survives this battle. Jan Zion noted that even the demon lord himself would not joke at such a moment. Nevertheless, she liked this deal and began to draw symbols on his hand. She said that these are the runes of recognition of the owner of her family. If he survived, then maybe she would give him a chance to become her master. The protagonist still died and apologized, because he realized that he would realize this deal only in the next life.